Welcome to Stat Masters, where we teach you how to use Player Profiler to win at fantasy football and better evaluate players. My name is Aaron Stewart. I'm a senior analyst for Player Profiler, and my co-host is Chris Buonagura, a fantasy intelligence network analyst for Player Profiler. Chris, who are we talking about today on Stat Masters?
So Ball Mania IV just dropped on Underdog, the biggest best ball tournament ever, $15 million in prizes, and the contest is filling at the speed of light. So we're going to break down one value player at each position today, and maybe a bonus player. We'll see. So I want to start with wide receiver, everyone's favorite position, and I want to go with Jeudy, a player that does get overlooked. He falls very often in drafts. His ADP right now, he sits in the range of wide receiver 23 and 48th overall off the board. Now, I've seen Jeudy go as late as 60th overall and closer to wide receiver 30, and I almost never see him drafted ahead of ADP or reached on. There's a lot of skepticism around this player because of underperformance the last few years in terms of stats totals. We look at Jeudy, right? We have a 6'1", 193 player with good enough athleticism for his size, who was a former first-round pick. We look at his scoring totals, not much the first 2 years, but he was wide receiver 19 in PPR points per game, and he did command 100 targets in 15 games in what can be considered a rock bottom situation for Denver Broncos. And he almost gets to 1,000 yards, has the 14.5 yards per reception, and still finds the end zone 6 times. Now we look further into the metrics from last season. His targets, target share, routes run, route participation, it's nothing great. We can go look and see if you can rationalize this with injury at all. And you do see a couple of injuries last year, a series of them. Nothing that took him out that long, but he did have 2 missed games with an ankle sprain, and he played a lot of games partially injured. That definitely played into it. So we look at further metrics. He did earn 24 deep targets on only 100 targets. That's very good. On top of that, he was 16th in yards after the catch. Overall, that's also very good. You look at yards per route run, it's very good. His yards per target is number 9. Basically, all of the major efficiency metrics, yards per team pass attempt, yards per reception, he's cresting the top 20, or he's well within the top 20, even down to his expected points added. This is a player who's proved himself last year to be top 20 across the board in a so-so injured season with one of the worst coaching situations you can ask for, and a team that pretty much bottomed out. Being drafted as wide receiver 23, and he falls. This is a player who very much has a ceiling a lot higher than his current draft slot, and when he's there in the 5th round, you're getting a guy who's probably a wide receiver 2 with a realistic ceiling to a wide receiver 1 finish.
This past season, in 2022, when you go down to the last efficiency row there, what you see is signs of Jeudy being good at football, not just fantasy football, football. Production premium, which goes across all game situations, ranked number 11th amongst receivers. Expected points added, number 14, means he was helping his Denver Broncos on the field. QB rating per target, number 13. Russell Wilson struggled last year, but it wasn't because of Jeudy. Best ball points added, and we're talking about this in best ball. He was top 20 in fantasy points per route run. Summary of this is he's good at football. It's translating into fantasy football points. They picked up his 5th-year option on his contract. They drafted Marvin Mims in the 2nd round. I get it. But it's because Cortland Sutton sucks. It's because Tim Patrick's coming off an ACL. They needed receivers. It's not because of Jeudy. They need someone to play alongside Jeudy.
Any argument against Jeudy is not based on any type of rationale, just fear. And whenever a good player starts to fall down draft boards because of fear reasons, that is always a time to start buying in fantasy football and best ball. And then we look at another good tool that Player Profiler has is depth charts. So you look at the Broncos depth chart, and last season, it was Jeudy, it was Sutton, it was Tim Patrick, and it was Hamler. Hamler comes in partially injured and turns out to just not be great. Patrick tears his ACL before the season starts. Cortland Sutton is a bust. Jerry Jeudy had the on and off injuries. They add Marquez Callaway, who's not on this list, but he's on the team. And then they add Marvin Mims. And that adds speedsters, that adds depth. It adds people to take the top off the offense, but you can't necessarily call it significant target competition to Jeudy. And now the offense as a whole can function much healthier because you have 4 to 6 NFL caliber players. And if one gets traded, if one gets hurt, if one gets cut, you still have guys. This leads into our next value at quarterback, which just is Russell Wilson. The move from Hackett to Sean Payton is going to be similar to the move from Urban Meyer to Doug Peterson for the Jaguars. And I was touting many Jaguars players last year, and I'm going to tout many Denver players this year because coaching is probably the last factor you consider when making fantasy football analysis, but it's still a factor. And going from outright non-professional level coaching to proven competent coaching is a massive upgrade. There was a small stretch last year where Russell Wilson's best target was Greg Dulcich, a rookie. He lost his stud running back. He lost both of his top 2 receivers at times. He lost his wide receiver 3. Offensive line injuries, a generally difficult division and conference. Of course they bottomed out. But now you have Sean Payton and you have depth. And you look, last season, he was QB 18 in points per game. I mean, a bottom out year, and he's still in the QB2 range. You look historically, QB 13, QB 6, 6, 13, 1, 17, 3, 3, 11, just a long career of being great. 34.4 years old. He's not aged out yet. And you look at the cost. Russell Wilson is currently in Best Ball Mania 4, quarterback 18. He's drafted at that floor. We have not accounted at all for the improvements to his situation, and he also falls. And now let's say you end up in a scenario where you've drafted Jerry Jeudy in a tournament like this, where you want correlation in the final weeks for a team that could potentially be vying for a wild card. It's an easy way to have safe correlation. So let's say you draft at the 3 slot and you take Chase, but Joe Burrow doesn't fall to you in the 4th round. In the 5th round, you get Jeudy. You now have an opportunity to have a Wilson-Jeudy stack. It's a cheap stack for guys being drafted at their floor who present to you a much higher ceiling. Now, do I think Russell Wilson's a top 6 quarterback? Of course not. But if Russell Wilson finishes as the QB 11 and you drafted him as QB 18, that's a win. And if Jerry Jeudy finishes as the wide receiver 15 and you drafted him as the wide receiver 25, that's a win. These are value players.
And speaking of Wilson, we have to acknowledge that the Denver Broncos last season, one of the most injured teams in the NFL. Everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. And I know this is a situation we try to avoid those when we're analyzing players. But what did the Broncos do this offseason? They said, Wilson struggles under pressure. If you look at his profile page in 2022, you see that he was one of the leaders in pressured throws. And on top of that, his pressured completion percentage was towards the bottom. It ranked number 31 amongst quarterbacks. What were the 2 big moves that they made this offseason in free agency? They brought in Ben Powers from Baltimore, Mike McGlinchey from the 49ers. 2 massive upgrades on the offensive line. Even the Broncos division rival, Kansas City Chiefs, when they got wrecked in the Super Bowl, they realized something. You can't just have a lackluster offensive line and expect the offense to do well. Those investments on offensive line are going to help Russell Wilson, who still wants to throw the ball deep. He's number 1 in deep ball attempts. Let Russell Wilson cook was a joke last year, but he wants to. He's wanting to chuck the ball deep. He's wanting to make plays. Now he's actually got some help on the offensive line that will help him succeed on that.
Now, we've talked about save value, players that help you build a floor in Best Ball Mania. But where are you going to build your ceiling? Where's your league winning value? And it's Nick Chubb. It's Nick Chubb for a number of reasons. The primary reason is cost. And you're going to say, but Chris, Nick Chubb is a 2nd round pick. How can you tell me a 2nd round pick is one of the best values in a fantasy football draft? And I'll tell you why. Because Nick Chubb is the RB6 right now in best ball drafts. But he's the overall player 21. You look among all positions, and Nick Chubb goes after wide receiver 11 and QB 3. He falls into the third round. He's a 2-3 turn player. You can start your fantasy draft with Justin Jefferson and Nick Chubb, two players that potentially finish first overall at their position. It is a cheat code. It is unfair. You can draft Nick Chubb as early as the 105, and it's not a reach. And I will tell you why. Because Nick Chubb is definitively a beast. And if you were ever going to bet on a player having a career year, it's 2023 Nick Chubb. 5'11", 227, good athlete, 27.3 years old. Give it a couple months. He's halfway through his 27th year of life entering this year. He is a light overall touches 27, right? It's similar to Derrick Henry from ages 27 to 29. Chubb was constantly relieved by Kareem Hunt. This is a player with essentially no injury history. He's always been durable. He's always been coined the best pure rusher in football. And then you look at what he's done. Always top 10. Last year was number 6 in PPR points per game. PPR. Underdog is half PPR. You move him up those ranks. 300 rush attempts last year and the 1,500 yards and the 13 total touchdowns with Jacoby Brissett the first 11 games and Rusty Watson the final 6 on a team that wasn't really playing for playoffs. You now have a vastly improved Browns team for a player that last year wasn't even getting crazy snaps or opportunity, but got a ton of carries and is efficient with it. Yards per touch is 13th. Juke rate is number 4. Evaded tackles is number 1. Breakaway run rate is number 7. Breakaway runs is number 1. Yards created is number 6. I mean, just point out a metric. I'll show you an elite player. The depth chart is currently just him and Jerome Ford. And even if you add someone, at this point, it doesn't make sense for the Browns to do anything but run Chubb. It doesn't matter how much more they plan on passing or whatever they plan on doing. Nick Chubb is looking down the barrel of 300 to 350 carries. He'll earn some targets. He's not an elite receiver, but he'll get 30, 40 targets. He'll do something with them. We're looking at a player that could crest 2,000 rushing yards and 20 touchdowns. Now, that's obviously a massive ceiling, but he doesn't have to hit that. 1,500 rushing yards and 13 touchdowns was number 6 in PPR points per game last year. He's currently RB6. This is a perfect scenario for him. And then you add on to the fact that while Deshaun Watson is, of course, mobile, he's not necessarily a rushing quarterback. He doesn't run the ball the way Fields and Jackson do. And you throw on the fact that the NFL in general is much more spread defenses. We see 4-man rushes instead of 5-man rushes, and we see less stacked boxes. You add on Deshaun Watson's the quarterback with Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, Donovan Peoples-Jones, Cedric Tillman. Their tight end room is good. You're not really going to be able to stack the box on this team. You saw Nick Chubb run against fewer stack boxes last year than he's used to. Number 9th in stack front carry rate. Usually he's like number 1, number 2. It's always a stacked front. And this is with Brissett. On most rushes, Chubb's only going to have to break or evade 1 tackle to get the extra 9 yards. The Browns could lead the league in efficiency and maybe not accrue the most yards, but accrue near the top in terms of most touchdowns. You want Nick Chubb. This is Nick Chubb year. Back of the 2nd round, early 3rd round is great cost. And when you draft top 4, your goal should be Nick Chubb or Tony Pollard on that 2nd pick. Why would I take wide receiver 9 through 11 before Nick Chubb? Why would I take Garrett Wilson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, or Waddle before Nick Chubb? 3 players that I like. I love Jalen Waddle. I think he's a stud. Give me Nick Chubb.
The thing that stood out to me in 2022 is he actually had a career high route participation. Now, you're not going to mistake him for Austin Eckler, but 40.4% route participation, it has gradually gone up over the past 4 seasons, and he's had Kareem Hunt that he shared the backfield with during that time. And his receptions versus receiving yards, he's always ranked higher in receiving yards than receptions. He's not a specialist as a pass catcher, but just like he is on the ground, super efficient when he does catch passes. Worst case scenario is he splits the backfield like he's done historically in his career, where he's been a top 10 running back the past 4 seasons. We've seen the floor, and that ceiling is sky high. If there's one player to pull a Derrick Henry that we've seen in recent seasons, it's Nick Chubb.
Yeah, Nick Chubb is probably the best running back value right now. And then our last one is far more boring, but very functional at tight end, is going to be Tyler Higbee. Tyler Higbee is nobody's idea of a sexy fantasy football option, but he's my idea of a great football tight end. 6'6", 249, and the 4.67 40-yard dash is the threshold of size and speed you want in a tight end. Far less guys hit this threshold than you would think. He's 30.3 years old, which is still in the apex range of tight end age. He's not too old. Tight ends, we know, take more years to break out, but their careers also extend. You forgive the first 3 years, which are the developmental tight end years, and the last 4 years, tight end 10, tight end 20, tight end 13, and tight end 15 in PPR points per game. It's someone who's always in that range of once you get past the top 8 tight ends, there's no difference from tight end 9 to tight end 20. And in best ball, you capitalize on this, on the fact that you can just mix boring tight ends that in a more conventional league, you never know when to start. In best ball, you don't have to know when to start them. He did earn 108 targets last year on a rock bottom year for the Rams. He earned 20.9% target share. They got rid of Allen Robinson. Now, no deep targets, right? Of course not. It's Tyler Higbee. He did good with yards after the catch, though. You get yards after the catch when your 250-pound monster of a person can run a 4.6 40. The rest of the metrics are good, not great. They certainly don't fall off the board. He's not inefficient. He just has moderate efficiency, but you're not drafting Tyler Higbee to be a top 6 tight end. You're not even necessarily drafting him to be a top 10 tight end. You're drafting him because when you look at tight ends, he is the tight end 19 right now with 116 fantasy points the last 2 seasons. For reference, TJ Hawkinson, our current tight end 3, scored 170 fantasy points last year. I mean, that's a 50 fantasy point difference. Once you got outside of 10, the rest of these guys don't separate much. And Higbee gives you a very safe floor ceiling combo. And there is correlation between elite satellite backs and tight end reception because they operate in similar areas of the field and similar game scenarios. Higbee doesn't have an elite satellite back to compete with for targets. Even if Cam Akers is a hit, he's not an elite satellite back. It's not like Gerald Everett, where Everett has to compete with Austin Eckler. When they're in short yardage positions, it's Higbee or it's Kupp, right? And one of the best ways that this team's going to bounce forward from last year and work around Matthew Stafford's injury to his elbow is going to be short yardage passing. Your 6'6" behemoth of an athlete tight end is perfect in that situation. He doesn't need 108 targets again, but 85 targets from 2 years ago is probably his floor. If he falls somewhere in between 2021 and 2022, you're very happy with his cost, and he was functional to your fantasy team. Very functional.
And the other thing with Higbee is we do have to add some context too. Last season we go, oh, it's bad. Yeah, it was a career low in yards per reception. He only scored 3 touchdowns on the 108 targets. But you could see in the game log here, there was a point of the season where something changed. And what that was the Rams were another team just devastated by injuries, especially on offensive line. They were signing guys off practice squad and starting them. And the impact on that was Higbee, who is a well-rounded tight end, was essentially having to function as a 6 offensive lineman. Look at the routes run at the start of the season, and then look what happened after week 5. It tops out at 25. The offense is healthier than it was this past season, and by default, it almost has to be. They had 20-plus guys on IR. Higbee is going to run more routes. He's going to be a check down guy. Look at the Rams. After Cooper Kupp, it could be Tyler Higbee being the second leading receiver. There isn't much in that depth chart. It's not a good team. They're going to have to pass. And Stafford, with his elbow injury, he's probably going to be checking down, and that's going to be Tyler Higbee. His best ball points added the past 4 seasons. It's ranked 7th last season, 17th the year before, 14th, and 7. He's really good in best ball, and he's being drafted as tight end 19. It's disgusting. He's not young. He's 30 years old. But, Chris, this is what best ball, like he's built for best ball. Am I wrong?
Players like this is who best ball is designed for. And even if the Rams add some type of player to wide receiver or tight end, it's not really going to hurt Higbee. And it's very unlikely, just coming off the aftermath of everything they gave away for Stafford, that they make some over-the-top trade. Higbee's a very safe bet, and he's very unattractive, so his price probably at no point goes up. Nobody's touting Tyler Higbee, but people are drafting him for sure. And speaking of another player that Best Ball was designed for, our bonus player, is we're going to go with Gabe Davis. Last year's most loved fan favorite overdrafted guy. Gabriel Davis went in the 4th round in Best Ball Mania 3 consistently. I don't think I ever saw him in the 5th round. 4th round pick, Gabriel Davis was massively overhyped last year, and the community put too high of expectations on him, and it was obvious he wasn't going to reach it after the 4-touchdown playoff game. But Gabriel Davis is not a bad player. He's being sold as one because he failed to reach expectations, but he is 6'2", 216. He has improved every year of his career. He finished as wide receiver 36 in PPR points per game last year, and he was a little inefficient for his volume, but he still did enough to like him. Now, the 18% target share, he's not going to command more than that pretty much ever. That's kind of who he is, but he had decent air yards with 1,400. His average target distance was excellent. He commanded a lot of deep targets, 24 deep targets on 92 routes. Not a yards after catch guy, and not really crushing efficiency, but his yards per reception was good. The Bills go ahead and add a tight end, and they have developmental players like Khalil Shakir in their wide receiver room. But he is essentially the de facto 2 again. Even if he's the number 3 and they do add a DeAndre Hopkins, he still has good value. Brandon Cooks is aging. At this point, he's just a guy. Jahan Dotson we like, but again, kind of just a guy. Jameson Williams, who's not playing for 6 weeks. Courtland Sutton, who's a bust. Deontay Johnson, who we like on this show, but he's not a league winner. Treylon Burks, the question is still out. Kadarius Toney, where you don't know. I mean, and then there's Gabe Davis. And if I'm going to take a guy that's just okay, but is the go-to medium and deep target for Josh Allen at wide receiver 39, that's a great pick. I'm not going to go crazy because there's still running backs and tight ends and quarterbacks in this range that I really like. And that's what's going to keep you from drafting Gabe Davis more. But among receivers, as wide receiver 39, that's essentially his floor. He's tethered to Josh Allen. This is a nice player. This is a nice pick. And this is who Best Ball was designed for. He was frustrating to start in your local redraft league last year, or in Dynasty where you overpaid for him in your startup because you were riding the hype. But in Best Ball, this is what they made this format for Gabe Davis.
It's always about ADP when it comes to players. Last season, he was going as a top 20 receiver in drafts, now barely in the top 40. And for those that are worried about Dalton Kincaid, I know he profiles as a great receiving tight end, but here's your first round tight ends that were drafted in the first round after pick 20 since 2017. Noah Fant, Hayden Hurst, OJ Howard, Evan Ingram, David Njoku. Of those 5, only Evan Ingram averaged over 8 fantasy points per game as a rookie. Kincaid can be great. He can work in Dynasty. Tight end is a tough position. We shouldn't be fading Gabe Davis because they brought in a tight end in the first round. We should assume that Dalton Kincaid is going to take a little bit of time to develop. The benefit of that is Gabriel Davis, his price will get pushed down because that's what people do. They react. Dalton Kincaid, first round tight end to the Buffalo Bills. Oh, bad news for Gabriel Davis. Not necessarily. And he was wide receiver 36 in best ball points added last year. You're getting him at his floor.
You're getting him at his floor. And typically when you're getting players at their floor, you are absorbing value in best ball. Those are 5 solid value players whose value should hold up throughout the course of the offseason. Draft them now, draft them at the same cost in August or cheaper, and just have a good time.
And if you're watching this video on YouTube, please remember to hit like, comment on the video, let us know which players you agree with, which ones you disagree with, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, you should know we do this show live on Discord. You can join the Player Profiler Discord server by going to playerprofiler.com/chat to join our Discord server. And why should you join? When we get finished recording this, we take questions from our audience. So come support us on Discord. And on that note, from Aaron and Chris, we bid you adieu till next time.
Hey, you like that video? Be sure to subscribe and activate those alerts so you get notified as soon as new videos drop. And be sure to check out PlayerProfiler.com. We have all the tools for you to dominate every type of fantasy league. We have a draft kit, Dynasty Deluxe, data analysis, DFS Dominator, and don't forget the player rankings to rule them all.